What do families dream of? That's right, they dream of their home. It starts with an idea, or rather from a sketch. The head of the family has a rough idea of what the future home would look like. All the ideas are put into drawing and onto the layout. The location is then chosen and the foundation of the house is ready to be built. How strong the foundation depends on how long the house will last. It's not easy to build a house. It's even harder to build a young state, our common home. It's no coincidence that such a comparison is made by the first president as he remembers the initial steps of Kazakhstan's independence.
Наше поколение родилось под счастливой звездой. Мы живые свидетели.
Our generation was born under a lucky star. We're the living witnesses and active participants in the formation of a new Kazakhstan. It happened in our generation, and it will not happen again. This is a great happiness, and this is our story. We have the honor and great responsibility to turn the dreams of our people, of freedom and prosperity of our native land into a reality. The era of independence has given us boundless horizons and unique opportunities for creativity and growth.
Уникальные возможности для созидания и роста.
The young generation who were born and raised in independent Kazakhstan believes that the existence of the state is given as it is. But the older generation remembers the time when Kazakhstan didn't have sovereignty and power to make its own decisions. This was the case until the beginning of the 1990s. Everything changed after the collapse of the USSR, the largest state union. One after another, the members of the union announced their independence. Kazakhstan was the last, and the reason was explained by Nursultan Nazarbayev in an interview. It's not about overtaking other countries or being the first or last. It's about keeping the state in order. Declaring independence is different from maintaining independence. There was no universal solution. Kazakhstan had to find its own way. On December 16, 1991, the first president signed the constitutional law on the state independence of the Republic of Kazakhstan.
Обстановка очень была непростая, да. Нужно было решать, куда идти, чего идти.
The situation was very challenging. We had to decide which path we want to take and decide where we want to go as we had no experience. What experience are we talking about? It's about the transition from socialism to capitalism. Usually the change is from capitalism to socialism, but in our case it's vice versa. We had no experience on this, so we had to learn how to build a market economy and how to make fundamental socio-economic transformations. We had to do everything by ourselves. Of course, the change didn't happen overnight. We made many business trips abroad. We talked, consulted, observed, and learned from the experience of other countries. In a way, we purchased the bicycle, which was previously invented. We learned how things are done, adapt it to the way we do things, the Kazakhstani way, so to speak, and ensure its coefficiency.
Поправочным казахстанским колоритом, коэффициентом.
Tolutai Suleimanov, the first foreign minister of independent Kazakhstan, recalls that the economic situation was extremely difficult. Production volumes fell steeply. Operations of industrial enterprises were stopped, and oil production decreased catastrophically.
Тяжелейшие условия были, да. Никаких связей, никого нет. Денег нет, значит, безработица сплошная, инфляция, значит, четыре знака.
The situation was very difficult. We had no connection, no money, high unemployment rate, inflation of 4 digits, around 1,200, no salary, no pension. The National Bank had 8 kilograms of silver, not gold, but silver. What does this mean? It means that our treasury is empty. We had to earn money. We had to restart the economy, the industry, and agriculture. At that time, universities and institutions are closed. There was no money. We needed funding, but from where? Our neighbors couldn't give because they themselves are poor.
Денег нету, финансировать надо, деньги откуда? Соседи никто не могли дать, потому что они сами бедные.
Я думаю, прежде всего, рядовые граждане и те, кто возложил на себя ответственность за преобразование, которые поневоле нужно было решать очень быстро,
I think the ordinary citizens and those who were responsible for the transformations, which had to be resolved quickly, faced a crisis of worldview. Our country experienced the most severe collapse of spirituality and ideology. What I meant by spirituality is the freedom of religion, the search for guidelines to build a balanced society. Maybe at that time it didn't matter for us what the name of the society was, but we were ready to overcome the challenges to build a bright future for our country.
Социально справедливого общества. Для нас, наверное, не важно было, как называлось бы это общество, но мы действительно были готовы преодолевать трудности ради того, чтобы построить светлое будущее.
The first president realized that Kazakhstan needed to build relationships with the world community to overcome its economic challenges. The country needed to advertise itself internationally and tell about its people, its geopolitical position, and the natural resources it owns. The first president started making trips to Europe, Asia, America, and Arab countries. After 6 months of hard work, 50 countries recognized Kazakhstan as an independent country of international law and signed documents to establish diplomatic relations.
Конечно, 30 лет тому назад дипломатии практически не было у нас. Как президент Установич Назарбаев говорил, мы внешнюю политику начали строить с белого листа.
Of course, 30 years ago, we didn't have any diplomatic relations. As first president Nursultan Abishevich Nazarbayev said, our foreign policy was built from scratch. At first, we didn't have any infrastructures or embassies. There were only 8 people in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs when I joined. Within a year and a half, the workforce grew to 700. Over 20 embassies were opened abroad. Our diplomats were trained overseas. The International Relations faculty was opened at the Qazaq University. I sent everyone abroad on business trips so that they can learn. The exchange of delegations, accompanying the president, members of the government, the embassy, all this is part of the education of personnel.
Президента, членов правительства, в посольствах, все это воспитание кадров.
This is how the young independent republic becomes a new player in the world. In 1992, Kazakhstan becomes a full member of the United Nations. The country is also a member of the OSCE, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the Eurasian Bank for Reconstruction and Development, as well as the Islamic International Arab Bank. Deputy of the Majlis, Dania Yespayeva, talks about the development of Kazakhstan's financial system in the early 1990s.
На момент принятия Декларации о независимости государства, это октябрь 1990 года.
There were 4 state banks at the time of the adoption of the Declaration of Independence of the state in October 1990. In 1991, many commercial banks were opened to replace the state banks. There were around 72 commercial banks in 1991, and about more than a year later, in 1993, there were 204 banks. So you can imagine how it was like, right?
В 1993 году таких банков стало 204. Ну, вы представляете, что это, да?
Experts said that at that time, the opening of a bank is as easy as opening any small enterprises. All that was needed was a minimum authorized capital, which was why every self-respecting entrepreneur saw the importance of having his own bank. But the practice was put under control after the National Bank revised its policy. The requirements for the authorized capital was tightened as soon as the Republic introduced its own currency.
В соответствии с полномочиями, предоставленными мне Конституцией Республики и Верховным Советом,
In accordance with the powers granted to me by the Constitution of the Republic and the Supreme Council, I signed a decree on the introduction of the national currency tenge in our country from 8 a.m. on November 15 this year. From this moment, the countdown of a new genuine independent state of Kazakhstan begins. All of us should be imbued with an understanding of the necessity and urgency of the circumstances and motivates for introducing our national currency.
И чрезвычайности обстоятельств и мотивов введения своей национальной валюты.
Вы знаете, до момента ввода, обмена, то есть в тенге, рубли на тенге, мы, сотрудники банка, даже не знали, когда это произойдет.
You know, until the moment of the introduction of the exchange of rubles to tenge, We, the bank employees, didn't even know when this would happen or if there would be a currency exchange. The most interesting thing is that the exchange of rubles to tenge was done in the shortest possible time, just in 5 days. I remember it very well. We started the exchange in 1993 on November 15th at 8 a.m. and the whole process was completed on November 20th. The currency exchange was completed throughout the whole country. Citizens over the age of 16 had the right to exchange the money, and the rate at that time was 1 to 500. No more than 100,000 rubles could be exchanged at one time.
500. Причем в одни руки можно было обменять не более 100 тысяч рублей.
But the amount was very high at that time. The majority of the population didn't have that kind of money. There was no work or production, and the basic necessities were often imported from abroad.
Страна нуждалась в кредитных ресурсах, конечно же.
The country needed credit resources, and of course the cost of these were high. I remember in 1994-1995, we issued loans at 300% per annum. It's unbelievable, right? How much should the production cost be to cover the interest rate of 300% per year? And of course it costs inflation.
И, конечно же, это подстегивало инфляцию.
At that time, the inflation rate was high and prices skyrocketed every day. Kazakhstan's inflation rate in the first year of its independence was 147%. Things were more difficult in the next 3 years, where prices shot up 60%. Only from 1995, prices were brought down by 30 times and became the lowest in the history of the country. Nursultan Nazarbayev, who managed to successfully lead the country out of the economic crisis in the 90s, has always acted according to the principles of first the economy and then politics. By that time, the first president had initiated the idea of Eurasian integration. The union represents the largest international market with a population of 170 million people, with initial members of Kazakhstan, Russia, and Belarus. Soon, Armenia and Kyrgyzstan joined. The integration became a platform for the development of joint ventures.
Феномен заключается в том, что ту государственность, которую мы сейчас имеем, мы не можем напрямую назвать калькой с какой-то asiatic или
The issue that we had before was that we cannot directly copy some Asian or European or Anglo-Saxon or American model of government, but we can adopt some of their constitutions to some extent. We can talk about this for a very long time if you want to refer to some of the original provisions. We have to admit that the Republic of Kazakhstan has a very special model of statehood, which should probably be called the Eurasian model. Perhaps Lev Gumilyov and his followers interpreters couldn't even imagine that the idea of Eurasianism can be transformed in this way.
Наверное, нужно назвать евразийским типом. И, наверное, Лев Гумилев в свое время, его последователи, интерпретаторы даже не могли предположить, что вот эта вот идея евразийства, она может таким образом трансформироваться.
A new constitution, a bicameral parliament, and a unique standard of national unity. The first president believes that reforms are only possible in a stable society. In the mid-1990s, Nursultan Nazarbayev proposed to create the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan. The advisory body became one of the brands of the republic.
В этот период, но сами понимаете, какой он сложный, в этот период, конечно же, была первая такая серьезная обкатка, встречи, консультации с лидерами крупных республиканских этнокультурных объединений.
During this period, well, you understand how difficult it is. There was the first such serious action. We had many meetings and consultations with leaders of large Republican ethnocultural associations. They said that we needed a strong foundation of inter-ethnic relations, and the relationship needs to be constant instead of from time to time. Based on the results of the consultations that we held the first session of the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan on March 1st, and it was declared that on March 1st, 1995, the Assembly of the People of Kazakhstan was established.
И 1 марта датируется указ от 1995 года, который как раз и учредил Ассамблею народа Казахстана.
2 years later, Kazakhstan's capital moved from Almaty to Akmola. The transfer process was completed by the end of autumn. On November 8th, the state symbols were transported to a new location. And a month later, the president, parliament and government began to work in Akmola. The main events of the year are renaming the capital city and advertising it internationally. The new city was built at an incredible pace with about 60 large projects completed in due time. The author of the master plan was a Japanese architect, Kisho Kurokawa, who won the Best City Sketch in the Capital City Ideas competition.
В чем идея? Новое молодое государство возникло со всеми катаклизмами, трудностями того времени.
What was the idea? A new young state was established despite all the calamities and challenges of that period. We needed to give a promising idea and to implement it and show the country's capabilities. This is our first step. As for the second step, the capital of the state should be in the center of the country. Thirdly, the state should be a platform of economic development, a new impulse that gathers all the new energy of Kazakhstan. Education will be centered here as well as culture. There will be healthcare, new technologies, and the new elite of intellectuals will grow here.
В этом месте. Здесь будет образование, здесь будет культура, здесь будет здравоохранение, здесь будут новые технологии. И здесь вырастет новая интеллигенция, новая элита.
In the same year, the Foreign Investors Council under the president was established to improve Kazakhstan's business climate. The next decade was the period of expanding the horizons of statehood. Over the years, Kazakhstan's position in the world has been significantly strengthened. Its economic potential grew and all land borders have been legally formalized. Once every 3 years, spiritual leaders participate in the Congress of Leaders of World and Traditional Religions event in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan was involved in the implementation of many important international projects.
30 лет – это исторически это короткий срок, а в нашей истории это огромный шаг, который был проделан нашей страной, нашим независимым государством. Хочу сказать, что наш опыт
30 years is a short period historically, but in our own history, our country has taken a huge step to create our independent state. Our experience in the history of a young state is unique. Our situation was different. Our success of having socio-economic transformations over these 30 years says everything about us. It's usually impossible to achieve such results. It takes decades, centuries. An economic and social foundation can always be built, a new person can be educated, and his mindset can be cultivated. This is what is needed for the generations. Take a look at the new generation that has grown in 30 years. They're completely different. They're young, constantly thinking of new ideas, progressive, able-bodied, and competitive. You can't compare them to the people who are 30 years older than them. They are now the face of the country. They are the face of the state and the face of the society.
Молодежь. Мыслящая, прогрессивная, трудоспособная, конкретно способная молодежь. И сравнивая с той молодежью, которая была 30 лет и сейчас, это несравнимо. А это лицо страны, это лицо государства, это лицо народа.
The young republic reached new heights in the third decade. Issues with the state border have been finally resolved. The plan for the next 50 years has been determined. The new strategy includes entering the list of the top 30 developed countries in the world. Kazakhstan has entered OSCE, as well as the Asian Games with a triumphant performance of Kazakhstani athletes. Kazakhstan is among the top 50 competitive countries in the world. During the years of independence, the country's GDP has grown by 18 times, and the incomes of the population by 9 times. The poverty level was reduced by 10 times. But according to experts, the main value of independence is
Формирование принципов идентичности.
the formation of the identity principles that brought Kazakhstan out as an abstract culture that was lost on the vast Asian subcontinent. Strictly speaking, we have experienced an inferiority complex where we had to explain about our country, its location, and how it differs from other countries, such as Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, for example.
Того, что мы вынуждены были объяснять, что это за страна, где она расположена, Чем она отличается от других станов, Туркменистанов, Таджикистанов, Кыргызстанов?
The main goals of the fourth decade are to be a strong state and a competitive nation. Therefore, continuous reforms are necessary. The new president has outlined the next stage for Kazakhstan. Kassym-Jomart Tokayev headed the republic in March 2019 on the initiative of the first president after a successful transition of power. As part of policy continuation, the head of state sets the next task, which will determine the success of the country in its glorious independence days.